Hello, everyone. Today we'll be discussing a very important and interesting research study looking at the connection between hormone replacement therapy and the effects it may or may not have on coronary heart disease, as well as the modifying effects of socioeconomic position on this relationship. From now on, hormone replacement therapy will be said as HRT, coronary heart disease as CHD, and socioeconomic position as SEP. Today, we will dive into the paper in 5 steps. First, looking at important background information important to the understanding of the nuanced relationship, then moving on to the details of the research undertaken and the results of that research. At the end of our presentation, we'll have an opportunity to discuss some important questions. Let's get started with a discussion of important background information. The objective of the paper was to assess the association between socioeconomic position throughout life course and hormone replacement therapy. There has been significant debate in the scientific community and the medical care community about the effects of HRT has on the development of coronary heart disease. This conversation arises from finding disparities between randomized controlled trials and observational studies. The former suggesting a slightly increased association of risk for coronary heart disease, and the latter suggesting a consistent protective effect of hormone replacement therapy against coronary heart disease. To explain this disparity of the results from these two study models, experts have suggested a number of possible explanations. Some experts believe the trials were the result of contaminated with bias, but this is largely refuted by the number of trials with results conclusion that have no effects. Another leading explanation is the variation of participant pools between the trial and observation studies. In the Women's Health Initiative trial, that was conducted using participants. It was conducted with older on average compared to actual average age when women typically begin hormone replacement therapy. Further, these participants were more obese on average in comparison to participants in observational studies. As a result of this age average and obesity status difference between trials and observational studies, it is possible that women in the randomized trials were more likely to already developed osteosclerosis and more at risk of developing prothrombotic effects of hormone replacement therapy compared to younger, more lean women in the observational studies. While these are important possibilities, the Women's Health Initiative did not show evidence of interactions of treatment assignment with age, prior hormone use, or body mass index for any cardiovascular outcomes. Side note, the researchers in the study emphasize the importance of obesity, and this is not of my own analysis of the paper. Another point for bias can be found in the results of the observational studies, which could have been affected by the residual confounders. While it is widely understood that HRT uptake is highly socially patterned and one's socioeconomic position is associated with CHD, observational studies have noted this and have failed to link adult socioeconomic position to the interaction between HRT and the CHD. The researchers still believe there was residual confounding via life course SEP. Research points to a strong association between childhood SEP and CHD risk, regardless of adult SEP. The researchers anticipated that residual confounding was linked to early childhood socioeconomic variables that are not entirely represented by adult risk factors. This explains that at least parts of the protection of HRT against ACHD as seen in the observational studies. The major goal of the study was to see if SEP in early childhood was linked to HRT usage in order to rule out this possibility. As we also wanted to see, they also wanted to see if a link between SEP and HRT in childhood is explained by adult socioeconomics, behavioral, or physiological risk factors. If this link exists, then appropriate correction for these adult risk variables should be enough to account for any potential confounding influence of SEP in childhood. Moving forward, let's begin to discuss the research methods used to test the hypothesis. To accomplish this, the researchers conducted a cross-sectional analysis of 4,286 women aged 60 to 79 years. The cross-sectional study had information collected between April 1999 and March 2001. These participants were randomly selected from a general practitioner list in 23 British towns and received approval from local ethics committee. The researchers looked at large numbers of socioeconomic indicators throughout a person's course of life. Indicating data included longest held occupation of participants fathered during their childhood household amenities such as bathrooms, hot water, bedroom sharing, car access, etc. Age of completion of full-time education, the longest held occupation of the participant and their spouse, adult housing tenure, car access, and pension arrangement. A woman's childhood social class was derived from her father's longest held occupation. Her adult social class was derived from her husband's longest held occupation, or her own longest held occupation for single women. Using the Registrar General's occupation classification methodology, the researchers defined adult and childhood social class as non-manual and manual, with I indicating professional occupation and V indicating manual unskilled occupations. The results were not altered from the analyses, although the reduction numbers made the results less precise. The majority of SEP indicators were binary variables. Adult and childhood social class was dichotomized for the main analysis into non-manual and manual groups that reduce bias via misclassification. Researchers dichotomized pension arrangement as the state only or state plus other, and adult housing tenure as a local authority or other. The median value of 15 years became the dichotomization point of age at leaving full-time education. HRT uptake, socioeconomic indicators, age of menopause, history of hysterectomy and oophorectomy, smoking history, and physical activity information was collected via self-completed questionnaires or research interviews with nurses. After a 6-hour fast, blood samples were collected to determine lipid levels and insulin resistance. Blood pressure, weight, height, waist, hip circumference were measured using standard procedure. Women had mitochondrial infiltration, angina, angioplasty, or coronary artery bypass grafting, or any woman with self-report of a physician diagnosis of these in their medical records were said to have coronary heart disease. After adjusting for participants who had not actually taken or were currently taking HRT, it was observed that 19.8% were categorized as ever having used HRT, and 7.5% were categorized as currently using HRT. When originally asked of those who had ever used HRT, 43% did not know the name or type of preparation, while only 9% of current users did not know. When originally asked of those who had ever taken HRT, 32% had combined estrogen and progesterone preparation, while 40% of current users had combined preparation. When originally asked of those who had ever had HRT, 18% used unopposed estrogen, while 39% of current users used unopposed estrogen. Each SEP indicator was presented for all study participants, regardless of HRT uptake status, with statistical analysis adjusted prevalences and 95% confidence intervals to assess individual SEP indicators with HRT uptake. Researchers utilized multiple logistic regressions. 3 logistic regression models were completed for every indicator. The first model assessed crude association. The second adjusted age as a continuous model for childhood indicators, and adult indicators were entered as full category variables, with the exception of binary of the binary one for car access. The third model included all additional physiological and adult behavioral risk factors that may have some association between childhood SEP and HRT. These factors were added to the second model. This model included these factors included continuous variables like systolic blood pressure, high density lipoprotein cholesterol, triglyceride levels, body mass index, waist to hip ratio, age of menopause, as well as indicator variables like smoking and physical activity. Covariates were not determined via data, but rather a priori. Rather than being, and age was dichotomized from 60 to 69 years, and then from 70 to 79 years to account for the increased HRT uptake among younger birth cohorts and reduce the association between SEP and HRT. Further, researchers created a life course SEP score from the 10 dichotomized indicators that assess the cumulative effect of life course SEP. The researchers created two scores, one with equal weight and another with inverse prevalence weight for each indicator given. Both socioeconomic composite scores were strongly correlated and had identical linear association between trends with HRT uptake. This concludes the background and methods section. The results of the study and strengths and limitations will be further discussed by my partner, Callie.